Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us here today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kathy Taylor, and I'm the Chief Executive with the Department for Child Protection. Now, I'd like to welcome all of you from the public sector who've joined us today. I'd like to thank our IPA South Australia partners and supporters to this event, and just to check that you're all in the event that you mean to be at. This is called Into the Unknown, dealing with change and uncertainty, and I think this is a really timely opportunity for so many of you to join us today. Can I begin before we go any further this morning by introducing Michael O'Brien to welcome us to country.
Tuwila Manibudnik, Tuwila Wakanapadnik. Nina Mani, hello to you out there in the Mukundu land, Wicca being the lightning brain or the internet or the computer, as we would say. Nai Ghana Biako Mankalankala Madawachanga Ghana Mina. Minyana na Mani Puraji, Nai Nari Kamatbi Marija. Nai Wangadi Mani Rabudni Gani Yatana, Irinti Yata, Tandandanga, Ipa. Welcome to the lands of the Ghana people. And today we meet in the place of the big red kangaroo, and wherever you are, I welcome you to those lands today. Welcome is very important because it isn't just about saying hello, it isn't just about saying are you well when you come to a place, but it's saying that we all do things in life and that we bring things when we come to a place. And so I know you've brought your knowledge, your wisdom to this place today, and we share a place, and when we look after a place, it will look after us. I'm known as the impatient one and the sixth-born male of 7 children and a descendant of the Ghana people of the Adelaide Plains and also of the Narungga people of the York Peninsula. And so it is wonderful that I can say hello to you. But I want to leave you a story about uncertainty and change. And it's a story about how this young person wanted to be a great hunter of his people. And he went to the great elder to ask him to be this great hunter. And the great elder said, well, you need to be quick, you need to have great listening skills, you need to be sharp, and you need to be strong. And he said, I can be all of those things. And off he went, and he learnt all of those skills and practiced, and he came back to the great elder, and he said, I'm ready to be one of our next great hunters of our people. And he said to him, I don't want you to be a great hunter, I want you to be a great leader. But he said, great elder, I've done everything that you have asked. He said, I know, my son. He said, you were quick to learn. He said, you had a sharp eye to see all the things around you, which meant that you could see our past, not only could see what we had today, but also to see what we needed for the future. He said you had great listening ears, not only to hear all things around you, but you could hear the words of the people, therefore you had the words to say to the people. He said not only were you strong in your physical ability, but you were strong in your nature, strong in your determination to achieve. He said all of those things make great qualities to be great leaders of our people. And so though it may be unknown to you, maybe there is some uncertainty, not only in this person, but all of us. If we look to our strengths, we look to observe and listen, we certainly can be a people not only of one, but a people that can move forward. So I look forward to seeing you, and I leave you these wonderful words. It's saying that truly we are brothers and sisters. When we walk together, we do so in harmony, recognise culture should bring us together, never divide, never say goodbye, always say see you later, which is nakara. So nakara, nechaya, and look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mickey. And I think for all of us, whether you're in the room here with me or you're watching this down the screen, what you're reminded of is the richness of not just the welcome, but the story that Mickey's always good enough to share with us. I'd now like to introduce the two speakers that you've joined us today to hear from. The first of those who's joining me here in the room is John Dare. And John's the CEO of Emotous. And I'd also like to introduce Lisa Paul, who's a change management consultant. And Lisa will also be joining us virtually from Canberra. Again, I'd just like to thank my office and also IPA SA, who've all worked together today to make this event possible. We acknowledge IPA's major partners, particularly the State Government of South Australia's Chief Executive Council and also the IPA sponsors. And we also acknowledge all of IPA's professional members and my fellow divisional councillors. So without further ado, I think it'd be great for us to hear from John. And before we hear from John, I might actually just share with you some of John's background. So as I said, John's the CEO of Emotous. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, John. Brings over 30 years experience transforming and building businesses and cultures to thrive in accelerating change. Now, prior to Emotous, John was a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, including co-founder of Dicero Partners, which was a world-class transformation consultancy, which later was sold to EY. Earlier, John had founded Positive Communications, which was a pioneer in consumer paging and growing the business in only 4.5 years. So you can see that John has undertaken a lot of different areas of focus, but he's a regular speaker on the things that we want to hear from him today on leadership, on strategy and transformation. And I think it's also really worthwhile mentioning he serves on a number of boards, including the Association for Corporate Growth, and holds an international MBA with honours from St Mary's College of California. And John and I were just reminiscing, having both spent time at school on the west coast of the USA. So I'd also like to briefly introduce Lisa Paul before we hear from John first up. Lisa was the secretary of a number of federal government departments from 2004 to 2016, serving Prime Ministers Howard, Rudd, Gillard, Abbott and Turnbull. I just said to Lisa she really deserves a medal because that is really and truly a story of survival and resilience. She left in 2016 to pursue new interests, and these included consulting and board directorships. She currently chairs the Audit Committee of the Australian Academy of Science. She's a director of the Future Battery Industry Cooperative Research Centre, the Australian American Leadership Dialogue, and she's a counsellor for Bond University. And previously, Lisa has been the chair for Headspace, the National Youth Mental Health Foundation, which so many of you would be aware of, from 2018 to 2021, has served on the government's Naval Shipbuilding Advisory Board, been a director of Social Ventures Australia, and a number of other not-for-profit boards, and has been a director of 2 listed companies and 1 unlisted, all of which have sold successfully. And in 2020, Lisa led a new initiative at the Business Council of Australia to help bushfire-affected communities recover under Sir Peter Cosgrove's leadership. And last year, she chaired a review into the quality of teacher education and also chaired a review of a program in the defence portfolio. So again, an extraordinary history of work and experience in change management. And Lisa will no doubt share with you her history of also mentoring and coaching people and talking about leadership through tough times. So enough about them. Let's hear from our first speaker, and I'd love to hand over to John Dare.
Thank you very much for that introduction. When we're looking at change and how we're going to navigate this level of uncertainty, there was 3 kind of primary things that I wanted to really review. First one is psychological safety and how important it is, because when we're dealing with uncertainty and the speed of change that we're all experiencing right now, there is nothing more fundamental than feeling safe and secure, especially in our work environment. And secondly, then I want to look at, as we move into this era, what is the leadership changes we need to make? What are the tools that we need? Because the tools that got us to where we're at today are not the tools that are going to get us successful in the future. So I want to talk a little bit about that, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of creating positive cultures. We've got some core research I'm really excited to share with you today as well. Before we jump to that, though, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we got here. If you think about the evolution that we've gone through, we started off, and I'm hoping there's some people on the call that remember the manufacturing era. I certainly do. And transitioning into this information age, and it was an exciting time. I was in Silicon Valley at that time, and there was a lot going on. It was very cool to be there and see the developments, and initially those technologies started getting implemented into manufacturing. As that transpired, that actually took quite some time, and as we got fully into the information age, it seemed like it was a millisecond, and we're in this knowledge sharing era today, which is very complex. And if you think about the evolution that we've gone through, it has been this shift from having the muscle to do our jobs to having the cognitive functioning to our jobs. And that is a massive change, especially when we think about what actually happened. Because on top of all of the disruption, uncertainty, and the speed of change that is all escalated due to technology, we get hit with a pandemic. And that was like icing on the cake for many of us. And in fact, that really started to induce higher levels of fear and sadness in our communities. In fact, the World Economic Forum announced about 6 months ago that a third of the population has depression and/or anxiety today. And if you, depending on which research paper you look at, somewhere between 50 and 60% of us have burnout. Many of us don't even know really what burnout is other than this feeling of depletion, but we can actually get kind of a foggy head to it, right? So we actually don't think quite as clearly as we used to. We get more cautious, and as a consequence, it's more difficult to make decisions. And so in addition to the depletion, there's just kind of this real malaise that you get into when you get into burnout. But the other thing that happens is that it absolutely starts to diminish our cognitive functioning at a time that we need it the most to actually navigate the levels of complexity and uncertainty that we're dealing with today. Now, one of the shifts that I really wanted to talk about was about the kind of leadership. And we, as we came through the manufacturing era, we really came into this command and control. This is way before many of us, even probably before me, command and control, authoritative type leadership. It came out of the military early on and worked quite effectively in businesses. But today, that type of leadership actually exacerbates the level of fear and uncertainty that we have in our workforces. And today, it's more important that we actually have a human-focused or a human-centered leadership style, so that we can actually play on even Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you think about it, right? Because the foundational level is safety and security. The middle level is belonging. And those are both essential parts of creating a workforce that becomes change-ready. I wanted to share some primary research that we've done at Emotous. We looked at all of the people we had worked with between 2015 and the end of February of 2020. And what we found year on year is that we had slight increases of emotional intelligence all the way through until February of 2020 from 100 to 108. And then in 3 short quarters after the pandemic hit, we dropped to 101.6, which is rounding up to 102. And that is a massive decline in a very rapid at very rapid speed. So we started to look at why that happened, what was really going on, and we sliced the data by gender, we sliced it by generation, we sliced it by job role, we sliced it by sector, and there were certainly interesting things in there, but nothing that would explain this kind of a decline. Then we actually sliced the data by the last question in our EQ profile assessment, which is, what is the mood you've been feeling for the last few weeks? And the answers, the responses, were the 8 primary human emotions. And based on that, what we found was there was a 95% increase in negative emotions and a 20% decrease in positive emotions, which is just a massive delta. Now, you can think about that and you can say, well, actually, that kind of makes sense. I mean, it was a shocking period for us. We were moving out of our offices and working from home, and we had kids out of school working there or trying to study while we're working. It was very disruptive in our lives, for sure. But what was actually happening to us that actually declined our emotional intelligence levels, which gives us this ability to have cognitive flexibility, our ability to adapt and move based on our circumstances in the world. And this is what we found. We found that people that actually put negative emotions into that answer actually had at least a deviation or deviation and a half lower cognitive flexibility. And what was more important is that the areas that were really declined are the areas that we need most in order to navigate through this situation, like collaboration, like critical thinking, resilience, proactivity, many of these factors that are essential. But the biggest one that declined was our brain agility. So this actually shows us that actually creating cultures and leading through a positive lens. If you think about it, this is the first quantifiable data, certainly that I've ever seen, that validates that positive leadership actually works and that authoritative leadership, which is typically based on fear and intimidation, does not work. Because when we're driving for outcomes in that fashion, get it done, get it done, get it done, what we're actually doing is actually diminishing the capability of our workforce to deliver on it. Coming in with a different leadership style where we're more positive, we're supportive, we're giving affirmations, we can do this, let's go. That style actually is going to create more positive emotion and open people up where they can actually think more clearly. Now, when I said we wanted to talk about 3 different things here, so I want to actually touch on that. I want to look at psychological safety and some of the importance of it. And I'll share some research with you from a guy named Paul Zak. It's a bit older research. I think it was done in 2017, where he actually went out and looked at a number of different organizations, and he measured points of psychological releases of oxytocin, both from a process perspective and a leadership behavioral perspective, and added those and compared those to performance outcomes. And this is what he found, that the top 25 compared to the bottom 25% actually had drastically different outcomes. Everything from less stress, higher engagement, higher levels of productivity, 50% increase in productivity. Can you imagine if you could actually get 50% higher levels of productivity? And when you think about in fact, Gallup came out with some research in 2019 that said if 80% of leaders were no longer in their job, it would make no difference to the bottom line, which was astounding. It actually really made me admire Gallup to actually come out with something like that, because who buys their reports? Leaders, right? And I was appalled when I first heard that. But as I started to think about it, I started thinking, wow, what would happen if we could just make some small adjustments? Look at the impact that we could actually have. We're all feeling like we're doing more with less. We're all feeling like it's just the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. What if we could make some changes? What if we could make some slight adjustments? So psychological safety is the belief that one will not be punished, humiliated for speaking up with new ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. So what is our risk to failure, as an example? What is our attitude towards risk and failure? Is it a blame game? Are we trying to, who did that? Are we immediately going there? Or are we actually starting to understand, are the processes working properly? What do we have wrong here? Is the training right? Are we motivating people? What are the different aspects? Because we have to make an assumption that everybody's doing the best they can, right? Because 99.9% of the time, that's true. So how are we going to lead and make a shift? When we start to think about this business-focused leadership versus human-focused leadership, really what we're talking about is, are we focused as leaders on execution and that's the primary push, or are we focused on growth of our people? Because if we're focused on growth of our people, the outcomes that we're going to get are going to be better and they're going to be sustainable. If we're focused on execution, it's like we're constantly driving and constantly having to push. But imagine what it would be like if you could actually create a team of leaders around you, all aligned to the same common vision of success, the impact that that could actually bring. So I wanted to share these specific leadership capabilities that we have worked on for quite some time in helping organizations that we've worked with start to shift their leadership. And I want you to notice, we don't have time to go through all of these right now, but I want you to just make note of some of them. Things like self-awareness, empathy, curiosity, authenticity, integrity. Many of these are not actually talked about when you think. In fact, research actually shows that if you ask leaders where their development needs are, it's either in technology or it's in finance. That's what they come back with. When you ask their people, it's in emotional intelligence. Right? That's what the leaders actually need. So where's the miss here? Where are we missing this? We lead based on our intentions, and I don't think there's a leader alive that wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to go in and bash people. I'm going to go in and be a micromanager. That doesn't happen. Poor leadership actually happens unconsciously. And if we're going to lead in the 21st century, we have to start to adopt some of these other capabilities. The way that we think and feel dictates behavior. As leaders today, as we're looking at execution, we're focused on behaviors and managing behaviors of workforce. But that's an outcome. If we're going to lead effectively in the 21st century, we have to come upstream and start to understand how people are thinking and feeling. And that starts to help give you insights of the change readiness that you need inside your organization. There's one other factor that I really wanted to talk about in here from a cultural perspective. We are all in a GSD mode, get stuff done. I don't always say stuff, but that's the mode we're in. Get it done, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And the challenge with that is that when we create that kind of an environment, it actually diminishes receptors in our brain that hold oxytocin. And oxytocin is the hormone of trust and love, trust and relationships. And so what happens is we actually get burned out because that's all we're doing, and our trust goes down inside the organization, our trust goes down with our leaders. And if you want evidence of that, go search on the Edelman report. Now, the thing that was interesting about the 2021 Edelman report, which he calls the Trust Barometer, is that in the first time in history, society is actually looking for corporate leaders to solve social problems. So our leadership is becoming more and more important in our workforces. And we have to start to create environments that are conducive to sustainability. We've always, if you just think about even yourselves and how you've kind of worked, there's always been this trade-off between your well-being and performance and what you get done. But the reality is that those are actually synergistic. If you were a professional athlete, you would work out and practice every single day so that for 5 seconds or 3 hours, you could perform at 100% on the field. We are performing 8 hours a day, at least 5 days a week. So how much practice, how much training, how much well-being are you giving yourselves in order to be at 100% when you walk in the door every day? So we call this the task positive trap that we get into. And the reason it's the task positive trap is that as we get into this task positive mode and getting it done, we get a dopamine hit every time we get it done. And dopamine is also a positive brain hormone. It's the same brain hormone, however, that we see in drug addiction, alcoholism, gambling. It's a feel-good hormone. And so we get it done and we go to the next thing. But the problem is that when we have successes, because we don't have the receptors for oxytocin, these things are short-lived. and we're on to the next thing and on to the next thing. And we just literally create burnout for ourselves. We have never, as an organization, we have never seen so many top executives in our history that are now falling over. They're taking 6 month, 9 month sabbaticals because of where we're at right now. So it is time for a shift. It is not sustainable with the path we're going down, I guess, is the core message. And the last thing I wanted to leave you with is that we can change this. This is the same chart that we looked at the beginning. These are people that went through some of our programs, some that were actually, many that were actually running within government today, and where they started pre-COVID, and then 6 to 7 months in COVID, they retook the assessment. And what was shocking about this is that while people that had not gone through the program were declining in emotional intelligence, these people actually increased in emotional intelligence. So they actually thrived through this environment. So that actually aligns to Martin Seligman's work around resilience and the experience that he had with the U.S. military. That's the same program that they're using at the Samory Center today for resilience. So these things can change. We can have impact with this. We just have to make the decisions to do it. If we do, not only are we going to get better outcomes, but we're going to create work environments that are more sustainable and that are always change ready, because we're no longer in an environment like the manufacturing era or even the industrial age where there was point in time transformations or change efforts that had to happen. Even then, 70% of those failed. Today, we are living in continuous change. And so we have got to get good at it, and we got to do it fast. I'll leave you with that.
Thank you, John. And I think we're all just thinking about that last line. We're in an era of continuous change. We're going to come back to John because we'll ask some questions after hearing from our next speaker. So I'm delighted to introduce Lisa Paul, who I've already outlined her history. And I might hand over to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Kathy. Very much appreciate. And well said, John. I agree with everything you've said. And if we can live what you've said, we will all be in a better place, that's for sure. So I'm coming to you all today from Ngunnawal land in Canberra, and I'd like to pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. I'm going also to talk about caring and trust. And I'm going to start with describing the definition of leadership that has resonated for me forever. And that followed some Australian research way back in the day where thousands of workers were surveyed about what they wanted from their leaders. And they said they wanted two things from their leaders. One is their leader's ability to describe the strategic direction. Where's my team heading? Where's the department heading? And secondly, they wanted their leaders to care for them in a genuine way, Now, you don't have to be managing people to be able to exercise these two pieces of leadership. Strategic direction. What does that mean? Well, it means you actually have to talk about it in your team in kind of a deliberate way. And you need to understand each person in the team and their own styles. So some people just need, where's our team heading? The destination described, or where's our department heading? Some people need to know that there's 6 lanes of traffic on the bridge to that destination. And some people need every brick in that bridge described. So the strategic direction about where are we heading, you can kind of create with your own team and then ask the higher ups as necessary, does this align? But the caring for the people piece, wow, that really needs to come to the fore now, as John's said. And I also want to acknowledge that you have been through an enormous time of uncertainty, and John's really highlighted that. Everyone's mental health has been affected, and I can certainly speak as chair of Headspace, the National Youth Mental Health Foundation. And I wanted also to say, not just to acknowledge the levels of uncertainty that everyone's been going through, but also to say, as they teach you in any first aid course, you have to look after your own mental health first. There's a lot of resources. There is a lot of help out there, even on the Headspace website. You can look at things it's not only for young people. And if you're caring for young people, please do reach out to that website or to others and see what's there. So caring for people in leadership means just the minute-to-minute behaviours, the day-to-day consistency, the respect for people, the lack of bullying, decency and courtesy, and never, ever wavering from being a decent human being, basically. And there's all sorts of ways of making formal those two pieces of leadership. And for example, in my former departments, when we did our performance rating, we would rate people 50% for business outcomes and 50% for leadership. And I'm absolutely certain that the floor of leadership capability in terms of caring for people in particular went up. So how do you care for people when the workload keeps going up? And that's pretty tough. I'll start by talking a bit about delegation. So you can tell I'm quite a practical tips and hints type person. Delegation is a secret to success. And I've certainly noticed, be interested in Kathy's view, but I've noticed over the years that work has been kind of shifting up the levels in the public service. And yet we often underestimate what people can do down the line. So even as a graduate, and I don't mean formal delegations here, I mean how you delegate work, how you task work. So even as a graduate, I was chairing community-based meetings because my supervisor was testing me, pushing me, but she was my safety net. And when we had to create a department, which was a merger of two whole departments and a large part of a third, we asked what federal government would call exec level 2s, and that's 5 levels down from the chief executive. It's under the senior executive level. We asked them, a task force of EL2s, to create the new structure, completely create the new structure, and it was perfect. And so, you know, this is a whole topic for hours on how you delegate work well. But if you're being delegated to, please remember, you know, you're being given a piece of work. Please remember, you can ask, what's the real deadline on this? What is the full context, including the political context? Do you first want to see a 50% job or an 80% job, and so on? But happy to talk a lot more about that at some other stage. And then what if you've got to give tough feedback upwards, even to ministers sometimes, about reasonableness? Here's the magic formula for feedback. And it goes, when you did or said X, and that has to be described absolutely neutrally, I felt, you have to own the feeling, I felt Y, and I would have preferred you to have done Z. So the time I used it on a minister, it went like this: Minister, when you wrote me a letter about my communications team, square brackets, really, really stinky letter, I felt distressed, brackets, blindingly angry, but anyway, I may have pulled that punch, and I would have preferred you to have rung me up. Silence. Went on to something else for 20 minutes. And then the minister genuinely, I kid you not, said, you know, that communications team, I think we should have them up to the office for a drink. So I could imagine doing this to a boss in this way. When you asked me after hours to do a piece of work by 9 o'clock the next day, I felt a bit panicked because I had other things on, and I would have preferred you to have tasked me with that earlier in the day, or given me a longer deadline, or given me a more detailed outline or something like that. Now, that might just start a conversation, but it's definitely a conversation worth having. And it is a very caring way to manage upwards as necessary. And I see today in some media, there might be more job cuts coming down the line in South Australia. We had to take 30% of people out of our organisation way back in the day over a short number of years, and yet take on more work. And by the final year of job cuts, it's like we were fresh out of ideas. So we actually asked every single person in the organisation for ideas of what work we could stop or change. What work could we stop or change? We got 9,000 ideas, and they range from default setting the printers to black and white, which saves $650K a year, right up to being brutally clear about priorities and matching people's capability to those priorities. And in the staff survey that year, morale actually went up, engagement went up, because everyone had been involved, even though we were cutting and cutting and cutting. So there's ways and ways of doing it, and I'm a big fan of caring for people by basically treating them as adults and involving them. So what about caring for people when we have to do internal change? The best framework I've seen on how people respond to change, think of a normal curve, and the slots in the normal curve are different ways people respond to change. At the far left of that normal curve are the innovators. Oh, they love change. They create change all the time. They thrive on change. They just desperately need change. To their right are the change agents. They might not create the change, but they're perfectly happy to go spruik it and implement it. To their right are the pragmatists. It's like, yeah, and there's a lot of them. It's like, oh yeah, more change, you know, been there, done that, but I can sort of see why, so I'll go along with it. To their right are the skeptics. Oh my God, it's never going to work. We've seen this 1,000 times before. Sigh. And to their right are the traditionalists. I really fear we're going to lose what's special about this department or team. Now, the really useful thing about this framework is that every single one of those sets of people, and you can place yourself on there depending on the type of change, deserves the same respect. A lot of people think it's sexy to be down the change agent end. Every single one of those groups has a role in change or their views about change are just as important to each other's. And secondly, if you're in, say, the traditionalist group, you're only going to be convinced by the skeptics. And if you're a skeptic, you're only going to be convinced by the pragmatists. And if you're a pragmatist, you might be convinced by a change agent. If you're a change agent, of course, you love your innovators. But if an innovator's talking to a traditionalist, they're talking different languages. So if you're a leader of people, it's really important to be able to speak all those languages. And it drives me nuts when a new chief executive comes in and changes everything and brings in their own people and blah, and doesn't actually respect the culture and the organisation, at least to start with, until there's some need for change. So when you're dealing with change, remember, where is everyone sitting in that framework, and who's on their right that can help, or on their left that can help convince the group to the right. And in terms of change management, look, you can honestly never communicate too much. You just can't. And it's really important in managing change formally that you have multiple ways of communicating outwards and downwards, but also, even more importantly, multiple channels for people's views to be heard upwards. And so when we would do really massive change, like the merger of 2 departments and a large part of a third, we did it very formally with change management task force, lots and lots of communication out. But in terms of communication back up, not only did we have all sorts of people could talk to, et cetera, we also had an anonymous phone line, even, where people who were really anxious could leave a voicemail and trust that only I would receive that and would answer it in a generic way, because I would know who it was, in a frequently asked questions format. So that's a lot about how you care for people through change. Let's turn just for the last couple of minutes about establishing trust in an environment of change. What if you face a change of government tomorrow? what does it take to gain trust in a change of government scenario? My view is, having done 2 of them at the federal level, it takes 3 months. And in those 3 months, you have to do the following. Language is unbelievably important. Labor has caucus, Liberals have backbench. Labor federally spells program with 1M, Coalition spells program MME. You have to know the language. In the past, Labor had senior private secretaries and Coalition had chiefs of staff. They've kind of normalised that between them now. You must know their language and prove that you've heard them. So if you're contributing to an incoming government brief, don't start with the glossary of acronyms. Start instead with some media points for and I know you will have done all these because tomorrow's the election, but it's great to start with what media your new minister in a change of government might face on the day, even tomorrow or Sunday, if it's clear. Give them a chart of their own electorate and what you do inside their electorate. Just understand who they are, what they come from and what they care about. So I had one minister who cared deeply about the backbench, clearly a coalition minister with backbench, and you always had to cover off on the backbench what was the implications. And how do they learn? How do ministers learn? Do they like to take a written briefing with the 5 killer points up top and then the story below? Or do they actually like a stepwise build up from go to the final conclusion? Everyone's style's very different. And I reckon if you do all of these things for 3 months, which would take you to the winter break, then they come back from break, they're relaxed and they just fully trust you. And that means they care for you too. And you can do stuff that's just too hard to do if the trust hasn't been created. And similarly, under a scenario of no change of government but new minister, most of what I've just said applies, but always remember, I used to say to my staff, history starts the day a new minister starts. History starts the day a new minister starts. And I even had one new minister briefly who replaced my former minister because they'd become prime minister. And even then he tried to change everything that the now prime minister had done when minister. History starts the day a new minister starts. That's it from me for now. If anyone wants to follow up, Kathy, I hope you don't mind, but you can ask me a question afterwards if you wish, and it's lisa@lisapaul.com.au, and that's my kind of free service in mentoring and coaching, lisa@lisapaul.com.au. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Lisa. And I think some incredibly timely reminders for us, as we sit here on the Friday before a weekend election. What I'm going to do now is first of all direct and really probably open up the dialogue with both John and Lisa with some questions that we've pre-prepared. And then we've also got an invitation out to people if they want to send us through questions. You're more than welcome to do so. John, I wanted to go back to you and this point of just the fact that change is no longer the thing that might happen, in a cycle. It's not something that happens, once every couple of months, that in fact we're in this, environment of almost change being a constant in it. And I know that for a lot of people, the worry is, how do I actually be change ready then in this sort of environment? Right. What are the practical things we can do, more or less of, that ensure that we're not at a heightened state? Because you'll wear out very quickly if we think about the advice you've already shared with us. But how can we actually be able to lean in or step into being change ready?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's 2 aspects to it, right? There's the organization aspect to it, and there's the individual aspect to it. From an organizational perspective, a lot of the things that Lisa talked about around communication is really important, and not just communication for communication's sake, but it's communication, especially in talking about quick wins. So we're starting to build momentum for the change. Making sure that we actually have an environment that is actually ready to make the changes that we need. I mean, if you think about I think it's one of the biggest statistics that I heard recently was that the biggest fear inside of organizations today is the fear of irrelevance in the workforce. I mean, you think about that. So, and in every change effort I've ever been involved in, when we see the toxic behaviors start to show up, the passive aggressiveness, the silo things, the defensiveness, this is like, I'm going to be here, long after, the leader is gone, the kind of, all that kind of, this is all fear-based stuff. It's all based on fear. And so that's the number one thing from a leadership perspective that we have to address. So we have to be able to talk about where we're currently at, make sure everybody is in alignment to that, where we're going and the benefits of where we're going, and then what is the safe passage to get from here to there. And Lisa touched on that because there's different people in our environment, and we have to be able to speak in a way that they can understand what that safe passage is. The better we do that, the easier the change is actually going to be for us, and we'll get through it a lot quicker. To be ready for that, we actually do have to focus on creating environments that are psychologically safe, which means we have to lead differently. That's essential, especially in today's environment, because just think about where we're at. I mean, we just are going through this huge technology era, which has created all this disruption and change. We have a pandemic. What's next? We've got a war that could lead to World War III on the horizon right now. We've got AI that's on the horizon right now. We don't know what AI is actually going to do to us yet. Are we going to have a recession or a depression as a consequence of the pandemic? I don't know, but for sure it's going to be something, and it'll be the next thing and the next thing. So this is going to continue. So organizations have got to start to shift the way that we're supporting people and that we become more people focused. People need to also take accountability for themselves. We cannot continue to push through, right? That's not what resilience is all about. Resilience is about continuing to fill our teacups up so that when we do have to put in that extra effort, that we have the energy to be able to do that in a good way, in maintaining our own well-being. So we're accountable for our well-being. And there's a lot of different specific things we can do. Now, what's interesting is that some of these actions that I'll tell you are the same actions that are necessary to navigate emotion, right? But they also align to preventing or coming back from burnout. The first thing is we got to move our bodies. We can't just be sitting at a computer the whole time. We've got to actually get out. You don't have to be a gym junkie. Just a 20-minute walk a day, 30 minutes a day, something, anything. Just, move your body because that releases endorphins. And it used to be with this next one, which is breath work or meditation. This is research out of Harvard University is showing that 10 minutes a day of focusing on your breath, doesn't even have to be in the same go, literally grows gray matter in the parts of your brain around self-awareness and compassion. It reduces the size of the amygdala, which is where your fight, flight, or freeze response processing sits. And so you're calmer. You don't have as much cortisol that's released. Cortisol creates anxiety, right? It increases self-observation capabilities. So we can actually have that outside-in view of ourselves and how we're navigating things. Breath work is absolutely essential today. I would suggest everybody starts that immediately. Positive social interaction, not just interaction, but positive social interaction. Don't hang out with people that deplete you. Hang out with people that fill you up, that make you feel good about yourself. Laughter, affection. The big thing I love is the 20-second hug. I don't know if you've heard of that. And I got to tell you, when you start to do it, 20 seconds is actually awkwardly long time for a hug. You get about 10 seconds in, even with your partner, it's like, okay, we're hugging here, right? Cry. And I know, guys, I know we got these gender roles, but the reality is we're human and we're made to cry. Tears actually release emotion. So these are just some factors. There's actually a book called Burnout by two sisters, PhD sisters, Emily and Amelia Nagassi. And it's a fantastic book. There's some podcasts that are out if you want to search on that. And they talk through kind of the 7 steps to navigate through the stress cycle. So individually, let's take accountability and let's start putting as many of these things into our day-to-day routines as we possibly can so we can start to navigate this.
Thank you for that. Lisa, I was thinking about the last couple of points you were making, but I was particularly thinking about the line you talked about, with delegation and just even having some of those, really important, more the safe conversations. I'm thinking about John's point about, psychological safety, but also about welcoming the input and the views from so many. Like, so often I think we're more inclined to focus inwards at times of great change rather than actually engage the hearts, the minds, the brains, trust of our people. One of the things I just wanted to ask you about was, how can we do this better in partnership rather than thinking we've got to do it alone? Because I'm certainly one of those people for whom I know I do best when I've got the diversity of views. I may not always agree with them, but much richer for the diversity of views, the different perspectives, for the person who sees it in just a way I would never imagine, and it gets you thinking. So I just wondered if you wanted to comment a little bit about how can we do more work in partnership, and as John says, not to deplete us, but actually to support us and to deliver better, environments to care for people and, work through this period of change.
This is such a good point. And I'll make a couple of comments. One is, it's really handy to understand all the different styles and therefore the types of perspectives of everyone in your team. And you can do that through any number of psychometrics, whether it's Myers-Briggs or the VIA strengths from Marty Seligman, as John mentioned, and positive psychology or whatever. But the great thing there is that if you understand everyone's styles and the way they think about things and preferences, then you fully respect and care about that range of views that you mentioned, Kathy. And I'll never forget having a kind of funny little scratch team ever so long ago of people I'd never met. And we went through an exercise where we had to draw our ideal organisation structure, and one of the other team members and I drew these kind of organic, the paper moves, they were kind of 3D, they looked like blobs. And then my executive assistant drew this beautiful triangle with lines in it and words. We thought sensational. So she was our organiser, the one who proofread the report we were all working on and closed out and got things done. It's great to actually do some teamwork to understand how you can really celebrate the differences in the team. And then the question about partnership, Kathy, really powerful. In these times of change and uncertainty, and they go on and on and on, if you do feel alone in that, then that's a big alarm bell for me. If you feel alone, then you are, and you need to do something. John's touched on a whole number of ways of looking after yourself. But the number one thing you've got to do is talk. So you've got to talk to someone about the uncertainty and the change, and talk about why you're feeling alone and the fact that you are feeling alone. And even if you are the boss of a team, you can certainly draw people together, and they want to be treated like adults anyway, and talk about uncertainty, even without revealing fully your own feelings of vulnerability. But also look outside the organisation. There are a huge number of organisations you can partner with, and I find in public sector we too often don't. We do look inside, and we've got so much expertise inside. That's fantastic. But for example, when I was doing the bushfire recovery work in 2020 for the Business Council, I actually brought someone in from Headspace, and he did this for us, and he did looking after your mental health piece when people were going out into bushfire affected communities. So there's all sorts of organisations you can actually partner with, and there'll be tons in your stakeholder networks and in the state. And I would just encourage it. And when you're undergoing stress, so for example, in critical incident stress debriefing, you would always be told to talk the incident, talk it until you're talked out. That maybe you need to find a number of people, so it's not the same person all the time, but very, very important. So that's just a few ideas there, Kathy.
Can I touch on something with that real quick? Because one of the things people need to understand is that when we are feeling that way, and it's exactly that chart that I had showed, and that's negative emotions, we close in. The last thing in the world we want to do is actually have social interaction. We want to close in, right? That needs to be the alarm bell for you. That needs to be the flag that goes up that says, actually, that's exactly what I need. And everybody's experienced that, right? It's like you're not feeling that well, or you're feeling really stressed. The last thing you want to do is go to dinner tonight with, you know what I mean? Is that kind of thing. But when you push yourself to do it, and you do it, and actually have a good time, right? Because we need that when we're feeling that way. But because you don't feel that way, that should be the signal for you.
It's it's an incredibly important point. I was talking to my deputy last night. She rang me after she'd done a few things, picked up the phone, gave me a call last night, and she asked me the question, how are you feeling? And I thought, first of all, and I'm sharing this online with a whole lot of people, because I think it's so important that we never step away from the fact that it doesn't matter who you are and where you sit within a broader environment or a system, you all have a feeling, a reaction, about the question of uncertainty and change. And so we talked it through, and I, was talking about the things that, I was thinking about, the things that didn't worry me, the things I wondered about, the things that did worry me. And then, and at the end of it, it was sort of like, oh, listen, you need to go and have dinner. I need to go and have dinner. It sounds really good. The other thing is, she's probably one of the people in the world who I can become quite driven at times, and she can make me laugh. And John, it's your point, and I was thinking of something that Lisa said about so important that we retain perspective in times of uncertainty of change, because we can start to actually, begin to believe that it's all negative and all of that. And I guess I wanted to ask both of you, so often change is framed in the negative. And I think one of the things that we've seen through COVID is, and there are some things about it that have been incredibly enabling and positive. Now, there's also been some other things that we think, did we anticipate that? Could we do that better? But I wondered, I might ask you first and then get Lisa to comment about, so often we frame change as a negative. What are the positive aspects about it? And it's not about being Pollyanna, good Lord, but how can we actually think about change,
Yeah, it's interesting, because we're actually, as humans, we're wired for protection, right? And our brains are just wired that way. So we are going to look for the negative. It's why the news actually doesn't report on all positive things happening. They report on negative things, because that's what's going to sell advertising. People are going to watch that. So we're kind of wired for that in the first place. And so that's what we look for. But the reality is you're right, is that, think about it. Even 5 years ago, we probably would not have even been able to do what we're doing here right now, sitting here talking to, hundreds of people. We wouldn't be able to do that, right? COVID has actually pushed us to that. How much closer are we to our families? We've actually spent I've spent a lot more time with my family than I ever have, and even in the US, I'm talking to them on FaceTime constantly. So there's been a lot of positive things that actually have come out of it. And I'm hoping that the shifts in that we're talking about today are also an outcome of this, because this isn't new. We're all human. All the stuff we're talking about has actually been a thing forever. Otherwise, Gallup would have never had that research. So, but the fact that we're in this environment now, it's bringing these things to the fore to be dealt with. And so I think those are all massively positive things that have come out of where we're at today. But it's also in a way telling us that we actually have to evolve just like we always have, right? We have to do that. And so it's giving us those indicators of how we have to evolve. So I think there's a lot of positivity out of where we're at.
Lisa, just going back to that lovely description you're doing earlier of the, the various points on the, I guess the reaction to change, and from your change agents and your early adopters through to the traditionalists, and of course there's real value in all of those areas, as you said. But as I just was saying to John, so often change is framed in the negative, and I don't want us to think it's always positive, but there are positive aspects of that. What would you want people to think about in terms of the things, particularly of the last couple of years, that we can draw upon?
Let's absolutely, number one, not lose the good stuff. And John referred to it. The good stuff is what we're doing now, and our ability to interact virtually in a safe environment, in a home environment potentially, or from somewhere that's safe for us in terms of our health and indeed even our mental health. And I know there's a whole lot of public sectors. For example, my niece works for a public sector organisation in New South Wales, where they've come out and said, you've all got to be back in the workplace. And of course, there's a whole lot of people that just doesn't suit, and it's completely unnecessary. And even the feds here in Canberra gave everyone a week to get back in the office in December, before Omicron hit. It's like, what? But they've made all these changes and it's working really well. So let's not lose the good stuff, number one. But also, if you can frame change in terms of what's in it for us, what's in it for our team, what can we get out of this? What's the opportunity here? And there often is, there often is. Or at least what's the full context of the change we're being asked to make? Why? So I'll never forget a minister who wanted media to be delivered at something like 5 a.m, which the comms folk, not the same comms folk, by the way, as my example, the comms folk didn't like, but until they realised the full context, which is that he was going on each day onto early AM at 6. So, context can make people feel differently about required changes as well, because people like to know why. So those are just a few ideas, but, there's certainly a lot of change, whether it's through AI or technology and so on, which will help us all be more client-centred in terms of our decision making, and even more caring if we get it right.
Lisa, I'm just going to stick with you for the time being. There was questions that people have sent in. One of the things you talked about earlier was this issue of managing up and the response, and how you actually do that. But what about when, and let's talk about executive management, of whom, I'm, certainly a member of that. What about when it's executive management who are resistant to change, and it's staff or others who are actually, thinking about the opportunities, they're eager to be at the forefront of change and all the benefits that come with it. Can you comment on that?
Yes. So this is quite common, actually, when the senior management are more reticent about making changes than the young and energetic. No, of course that you're not young, of course, Kathy.
I'm taking no offence.
the younger. But on my normal curve, where are those senior leaders? Because they're somewhere that needs to be respected. Are they a traditionalist saying, I don't want to make this change because I don't want to lose the secret source of this organisation, which in my view is blah, blah? Or are they a skeptic? I've been around this block before. Or are they a pragmatist? Yeah, I can see it, but, I'm not going to jump for joy because I've kind of been around this block before. If you are a person who, say a younger person who's got heaps of energy and sees lots of changes that would be really, really helpful in your organisation, do understand where those guys are coming from, because they probably do have a point. And don't forget, they're only going to be convinced by the little group to their left on my normal curve. And then the other thing I'd say is, but don't give up, because you're probably right. You're probably right. And the changes would help the organisation and help supporting everybody in the organisation. So often what I've found is that if you say you're a bunch of graduates and you can see something that needs to change, or a team of younger, newer people who can see improvements that can be made, offer to do those changes in a safe way for the executive. So do it in a trial sense, a pilot sense, do it without prejudice, so they can, kill it if necessary. Well, if they think it's necessary, hopefully they won't. Almost certainly they won't. Almost certainly they'll say, oh yeah, that's actually a pretty good idea. I really like that. And then find out who they listen to, down the tree. So if they're 4 levels above you or 6 levels above you, who do they listen to 2 levels above you? And then convince those people. So it might be a journey to convince the chief executives or the deputies, deputy chief executives, but stick to the journey, because it will be worth it. And then there's lots of sneaky ways of showcasing great ideas for change that then everyone else thinks they thought of, which is always a good tactic as well.
Thank you for that, Lisa. Another one of the questions that's come in previously from the audience, and I thought, John, you actually talked about this before, so I wanted to just follow up with you about it. It's that issue about managing anxiety. And one of the questions was actually about, what about when, and are there some pointers you'd direct us to, where it feels like the anxiety's come in out of left field? You've been doing well, you've actually survived the last couple of years, you're clear about it, and then out of the blue, over a couple of weeks, suddenly you've got this sense, this sort of concern, you're not feeling okay, and you can't see where you are in the scheme of it all. Advice, pointers, tips for the young punters.
So this actually happened to me just before the holidays. So, what we're seeing that it's the people that have this high drive and are high performers and perfectionists, and they're getting things done. Those are the ones that are starting to fall over, and because they are depleted. I think that the answer is not too dissimilar than where I was previously, that, this is a wake-up call. Firstly, definitely take the time you need to take care of yourself. And if you need help, then professional help, get that for sure. But if it's just a matter of if you're feeling this depletion and burnout and you're feeling anxious, I didn't even know how I was feeling when it happened. I've never felt anxious. I've never had anxiety like that, ever, in my life. And so, and all of a sudden it's like my heart's racing and I'm feeling this weird thing. And it was actually my wife that said, "You're feeling anxiety, John." I had no idea what it was. And that was a wake-up call for me. Use it as a wake-up call. It's like, no, actually, you're human just like the rest of us. And so we're not iron men and women out there. We have to actually take care of ourselves as well. And so get into your exercise routine, start doing breath work, get out and have social interaction. As Lisa was saying, talk, right? And a lot of times, especially males, we like to go into our cave to work things out. Where women actually navigate things through dialogue with others. But you got to get out of the cave. You actually have to get out, and you have to have positive social interaction and so forth. So all of the things that we've talked about, I think, come into play. But definitely take the time off right now, because otherwise this will continue. So get the time out of the environment, start building these things into your routine, and then come back in.
Thank you for that. Lisa, can I come back to you? And again, this is another question from the audience. And I was thinking about some of the examples that you've provided. You were talking about, for example, structural change where you're bringing together departments. It might be mergers, it might be, machinery, government changes. But what about the changes or uncertainty that aren't, those structural changes that are playing out? It might be a change in, manager, maybe not at the most senior level, but suddenly someone that you haven't necessarily worked with before. There's some movement, or alternatively, somebody's left to take up a new role and someone from within the team has needed to step up. Because this is, when we talk about change and uncertainty, we're not just talking about at, the whole of systems level or structural levels. We're talking about it, at all levels. What advice would you provide to people about how do you keep your head above water?
Yeah, very, very good question. It's great to keep your collegial support team around you. So say, one of your most valued colleagues leaves the area, leaves your team, or even leaves the department you're in or the agency. Please keep in touch with them. Don't lose the people who you've worked with that you work with well and you have a positive relationship with. And similarly, don't lose contact with bosses who have moved on. So it's really helpful to have what I'd call mentors or champions. And I discovered completely casually that I must have had a bunch of them because suddenly I was asking a heap of former bosses about a job move I was being offered. Was it a good idea? It's really important to don't lose those contacts of people you respect and who you've learned from. And then with a new boss, well, it's similar to new minister. What's their learning style? How do they like to take in information? If they like to take in they're a very, very quiet person, very thoughtful, they think deeply before they speak. This is the opposite to me. And then they may well want to be communicated with by email, in writing first. So I used to have, even though I am perfectly comfortable chewing the fat about a problem, I had someone working for me once who was that sort of person. And so I would ask him a deep policy question by email and then give him a couple of days to think it through. And of course, I got back absolutely the best quality answers. So you need to find out their style. But if, on the other hand, they like to talk things over, and some bosses will drive you mad because they like to talk things over for hours before they come to a conclusion. But, that just is what you have to work out what their style is. And you can short circuit that by doing some of that team building work. You've got a new boss. Let's do some of the psychometrics, many of which you can do for free in the team to find out what all their styles are, because that'll help them enormously. So those sort of ideas, but it'll also help you in finding out who they are. And then, of course, doing the things that John's been talked about, having a bit of fun. And celebrating wins, even tiny wins, just so important currently, and forever really. But those things, do the morning tea or whatever it takes to get to know the new boss, and those things really help as well.
Thank you for that. One of the things that strikes me, and you've mentioned it, and it's this importance of mentoring and coaching, which are very different things, but incredibly important. One of the things here in South Australia that IPA has supported for a really long time is, programs about really good mentoring. You've probably both at different times been a mentor for people, as well as, I don't know if you ever remember being, an early mentee in this environment. And more often than not, I just think there's incredible value, in actually establishing, and, working that through with having a mentor that, can actually provide you with sound advice. John, what was the funniest or a most unusual mentoring relationship you ever found yourself in?
I actually have one right now. It's I've never really I serial entrepreneur when I was from 20 years old, starting my first business, and I just, other than some venture capitalist people that I'd work with here and there, I really never had a mentor. And later in life, I did my MBA, and there was an adjunct professor that came in, and he was the former chief financial officer of Bank of America. And during the program, I would ask a question, and he would say, John, that's the next slide, and he'd click it and answer the question. And about the third time that happened, he started really getting on me about it, right, and giving me, we started needling each other. And then in these programs, you have to do presentations as well, and literally the same thing happened reverse. And so we connected. I called him and said, do you want to grab coffee? We became great friends, actually. And he has been a mentor for me now for, I guess it's been about 10 years. And it's just been a phenomenal relationship. There's a friendship there, but I can ask him anything. He's ran international banking for B of A. This guy has got such depth. He's so authentic. You go to his house, it's very modest. He drives a Prius. I mean, he's just a wonderful human being. And just recently, he's been retired for some time, but he's got a lot of investments and so forth. And he's now asking me for advice in how he should distribute his wealth, which has just been this kind of turnaround. So these relationships that you can create and mentor relationships are just, I think they're absolutely priceless now. I never really took time for them. I was running so fast, but they're absolutely priceless. And I think that they actually can work both ways, because the mentees mostly now are younger. Many of them grew up doing business or learning business like this, and which is different than the mentors in many cases, which ended up doing business like this. And so we have this difference where the baby boomers now are in their legacy years and they want to give back, and so this is a great position for them to be in, so their legacy years are quite important. On the other hand, you've got this younger generation that they want to do things that are meaningful, right? That's really important to these younger generations, and so they can actually connect on those 2 points, which is exactly what indirectly has happened with Bob and I. And it's one of the advice that I give inside of organizations all the time, because we always talk about this generation issue that's happening in organizations. And this is how you bring them together. You bring them together on purpose and meaning and why we do what we do. And then everything else from there can fall out, because they'll take the time, and each of us can learn. It doesn't have to be a one-way relationship. If you're just going and you're just asking questions of someone that's been there, that can get old, and at a point, it's like it almost runs its course, right? But if it's a relationship and both parties are learning, it seems like it's just sustainable.
And you're so right, because this idea that somehow someone's walked your path before and suddenly they've got all the answers, and as long as you do 1, 2, and 3, that all will be okay. But of course,
it's not true.
Rarely the same.
No, it's not ever. Yeah, I mean, especially now, because just think about how fast things are changing, right? So the landscape that Bob was in when he went through these things is so different than the landscape that we're in today. It is so different, and it's going to be very different even 5 years from now. So, yeah, I think it's more about dialogue and connection then. So the relationship has to really be based on deep connection.
And Lisa, you were mentioning, the valuable role, talking about collegial support, mentoring and all of that. But really, it comes back to some of those early messages you were also giving about, that critical need to invest in dialogue and to not assume that everybody is going to, communicate in the same ways. But do you find yourself now more being the mentor than, are you ever finding yourself stepping into the mentee role these days?
Well, if I can step into the mentee role, it's fantastic. But, and I've always had coaches, like formal coaches, who are very, very, and I have two of them. They're really top-rate psychologists, and they, give me insights and wisdom that no one else can. But yes, often I step into the mentor or the coach or whatever, and I did a thing that gave me more than I ever expected. When I finished work in the public service, federal public service, I offered that anyone who'd ever worked for me could have a free hour of coaching or mentoring. And I spoke in that first year to more than 100 folk, I guess, who sought me out for that. And I'm absolutely positive I gained more than they did, or at least hopefully the same. Hugely rewarding, and something that I still love to do. And you honestly, you get back just as much as you give. Yeah. There's no doubt about it. But I never, just back on what you were saying a minute ago, never underrate the wisdom of those who have been before, though. So in my case, when I was a deputy chief executive, I was made an offer to move at level to become deputy in a different department, and my heart was against it. I had no reason to leave my current department. I adored my boss. My colleagues were sensational. The work was phenomenal. It was where I'd always wanted to be, blah, blah. But I went out to the folk I mentioned, the kind of 6 former bosses, and some kind of formal folk like the Public Service Commissioner of the time, and about 6, I think there was about 6, and they all said, no, you should make the move. And so even though my heart was against it, I made the move. And not only did I learn an enormous amount by making the move, I learned different stuff, different business, et cetera, but then I became chief executive of that department. So it kind of worked out quite well. So never underestimate the wisdom of those that have been before as well.
And I think that's that issue about, being able, yes, I'm feeling anxious about this. Why would someone suggest, this in a time of uncertainty and change? Don't I want to be where I know how the place works? I know, what the artifacts mean, what the stories are, but what are the opportunities, that might exist elsewhere? We're coming up to near the end of time for this session, so I probably really wanted to ask for final comments from both of you. Here we are sitting on a Friday morning. People have really, we're still living through a period of COVID. Lisa finds herself joining us from Canberra. John, you and I are here in beautiful Adelaide. It's going to be a fabulous weekend here. Thank God for the sun. But, if you think about, wonder what Monday will bring. And I'm not just talking about, the aftermath of an election. I'm talking about all of us, what does, the start of the next week bring? What are the things that you just really want people to take away with them, if nothing else, because most of us, people will have really listened to what you both said, but it's the little things. What am I just going to pack up and bring in with me with my lunch on Monday, ready for the week ahead?
I want to close off on one key point that I think is really important, and it's not to miss this relationship opportunity as leader, as coach. Because when we're talking about mentoring, that is one of the most important relationships, and that is what makes or breaks organizations, is that relationship. People don't leave jobs, they leave bosses. And leader as coach actually is about how we are being a mentor, and we're focused on the development of our people rather than just the execution. It's got to be both. We've got to be focused on the growth of our people. So that's one thing I really would love people to take away. I think on Monday morning, though, I think the key messages are that we all are accountable for where we're at. We have to become change ready ourselves. We've got to be accountable for our own well-being. So start putting some of these things into action. And we don't know what the future is going to hold. We have no idea. Look at it that there's going to absolutely be opportunity. No matter what happens, there's going to be opportunities. Yes, there are going to be things that are negative. No doubt, we're going to have to navigate through. But there's also going to be the good stuff. And so keep focused on the good stuff. It's the positive, remember the positive emotions, what opens us up, and it's going to allow us to navigate this uncertain world that we're in.
Thank you for that. And Lisa, what's your advice for all of us facing this era of change and uncertainty? What should we be putting in our kit bag on Monday morning as we're also packing our lunch and getting ready for the week ahead?
Similar to John, try to come in with a positive mindset or start the day with a positive mindset. You might rehearse what you're thankful for, that exercise of gratitude. What are the 3 things you're grateful for each day, at the end of each day or the beginning of each day? Incredibly powerful, changes the brain, as John has said. And try to stay optimistic. Think of the opportunities. And if that sounds really difficult to be able to deliver for yourself on Monday, maybe take a few small steps over the weekend, like the breathing work for a minute or 10 minutes, or a bit of exercise and enough water. Those tiny steps will make a difference, and might require a bit of patience, but really, really do make a difference. So see if you can bring in a positive mindset and think about the opportunities of whatever comes out of tomorrow's election and forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. So I'm going to just wrap up very briefly, but firstly, I think I'd love to say a huge thanks to both John and Lisa for joining us this morning. It's been incredible, firstly, for you to talk with us, but just also to share your own personal stories, your own journey, your reflections, and, practically what else can we do? And that opportunity to recognise that none of us are immune from how we experience change and uncertainty. So I'll certainly, on behalf of all of the members and all of the people who've joined us today, thank you so much, John.
Absolutely a pleasure.
And thank you so much, Lisa. And on behalf of IPA, I really wanted to thank the team for a wonderful event. As I said at the outset, I just think the timing is sensational. It's interesting, even if all of you went, I don't know what I got out of that. I'm sitting here with a little list for myself of things I want to pay attention to. Because the truth is, it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're, the ASO2, working, in a small agency, whether you're, the manager of an area, whether you're someone that is hoping that change might occur on the weekend, whether you're someone who's actually really anxious about change, all of us have to be prepared and actually have to be able to do well in this environment. And I just want to come back to a point that both John and Lisa started with, and I want to bring us back to. Ultimately, this is about looking after and caring for our fellow, staff, those that we work with, our families and all of that. We can't do this work without looking after everybody that we interact with. So I really want to commend all of you for joining us this morning, and thank you very much. And we look forward to joining you again in the future for another IPA offering. Thank you.